everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Temperature swings are having an impact on Oklahoma's wheat crop. To learn about possible freeze damage, SUNUP's Dave Deacon caught up with our Extension small grain specialist, David Marburger.
A significant amount of time and temperatures, mid to lower 20s, in some areas on the panhandle even into the teens. And with any time when we have freeze injury, we need to, it's very hard, but we need to be patient. We need to wait at least 5 to 7 days before we go out and start assessing what was the injury on that crop. If temperatures after the freeze event even stay cooler maybe than normal, then we might have to wait even longer before we can really truly assess the amount of injury that we had.
I know that in a freeze damage situation like that, time and temperature is going to, and location is going to play a role into how much freeze damage there is. Is wheat on a hill better than wheat in a valley? And if so, how long does it need to be below freezing before it can be damaged?
One of the frustrating things about freeze damage is every freeze event is unique, and there's a number of factors that go into whether we're going to see a significant amount of injury or not. And you listed a couple of them there. What growth stage are we at with the plants? How cold did we get? How long did we stay at those cold temperatures? Topography, so plants on top of a hill may not be injured as much as those in a lower spot in the field, because the cooler air can settle into that lower spot into the field.
Earlier this last week, you hit the road and you went up into northwest Oklahoma and saw some of the wheat up there. What did you see?
Yep. So we were heading out that way to get an opportunity to look at some of our variety trials and get our signs put up in those areas. And we were from Cherokee all the way west out to Keys. Growth stage wise, in our variety trials, we're anywhere from about Feeks 8, so the flag leaf starting to come out, up to not quite getting into jointing yet as we moved out into the panhandle. Cherokee to Alva, starting to see some leaf tip burn, which is what we're often going to see in a freeze event. In some cases, we did see some tillers which were starting to turn brown, indicating that growing point is dead. But other than that, as the further west we moved, right now it was just a lot more leaf injury at the moment. That's not to say we can't have maybe some more.
And hopefully by the time we get to June, maybe July, we should be done with the freezes. What should producers look for in the field whenever they do go out and scout for freeze damage?
Yep. So one, make sure you know what growth stage you're at. One of the first things you'll probably see is leaf tip burn. So out on the leaf tips, it's going to start turn dead color. It might start to curl up. A lot of times that's typically just cosmetic injuries. But we need to check the growing point. We need to make sure that growing point is still alive and healthy. What's that head look like? So get out there and start splitting stems lengthways. Try to get and isolate that head and take a look at it. If that head should typically be a greenish color, it should look plump, look turgid. If it's turned off white, if it looks flaccid, it doesn't look plump anymore, that is an indication that tiller could be dead. After that, if plants that are much further along, we get into the boot, we get into the beginning heading, as we kind of are in parts of the state in southwest Oklahoma. We need to start looking at the head. You might see blank spots on the head where those particular spikelets were killed as the head emerges. Heads that emerge should be green color. If they start to turn more of a light, like a yellowish color, water-soaked appearance, that's not a good indication.
Okay, thank you much, David Marburger. And for more information on assessing freeze damage, check out our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet weather report. This week, folks are thinking freeze and fire. Last weekend was a cold one, with freezing temperatures across the state on Saturday and Sunday mornings. Nowata had the highest number of hours below freezing, 28. Honors for the coldest temperature went to Slapout with a minimum air temperature of 16 degrees. Every Mesonet site went below freezing last weekend. The lowest number of freeze hours was at Idabel, 6 hours. The check for freeze damage has started and will continue next week. Some plants are very sensitive to cold, while others barely notice the chill. Some growth stages on a single plant may be damaged, so the plant has both freeze-damaged leaves or flowers and healthy leaves or flowers. From those freezing temperatures, we finished the week with high fire danger days. Wednesday's heat and wind drove the Mesonet burning index into the hundreds. At 4 p.m. Wednesday, 16 Mesonet sites had burning indexes above 100. If fires had started in those locations, flames would have been over 10 feet high at the head of the fire. Fire danger will be with us until we get more warm season growth. This picture from a prescribed burn shows how green growing plants stop fire. Here's Gary with a check on rain and drought.
Thanks, Alan. Good morning, everyone. Well, we've had just about everything weather-wise over the last few weeks, but one thing we've had for months and months is, of course, drought. And it is really packing a wallop across western Oklahoma. So let's get straight to that new drought monitor map. As you can see, the western half of the state covered by severe to extreme to even exceptional drought. The worst category on the drought monitor, that covers much of the northwestern quarter of the state all the way through the Oklahoma Panhandle. I-44 serves as that rough dividing line between drought and no drought. A little bit more in southwestern Oklahoma, a little bit less in northeastern Oklahoma. But the drought continues, and so does the lack of rainfall. So let's take a look at some Mesonet rainfall maps. Now, the 30-day rainfall map looks pretty good, again, if you're southeast of I-44, and a little bit up in north-central Oklahoma, in Alfalfa, Grant counties, that area. However, if you look at the percentage of normal rainfall from the Mesonet for the last 30 days, you'll see even that area up in north-central Oklahoma is still well below normal. And, of course, the good rains, as usual, are down in south-central over into east-central Oklahoma. Now, the worst of that drought up in northwestern Oklahoma, that has its roots all the way back into the 1st of October of 2017. If we look at a 180-day rainfall map, we can see again the same type of pattern. Western Oklahoma, largely devoid of significant rainfall, but some pretty good rains across southeastern Oklahoma. Now, the percentage of normal map is just about the same as the 30-day map. I-44 once again serves as that rough dividing line. You go out to the Panhandle and they have less than 10% of normal rainfall. Now, we did have significant fire weather this week. That did a lot more damage, I'm sure. So we're going to have to take that into account in next week's map. So stay tuned for that next week, and we'll see you then on the Mesonet Weather Report.
As we're completing this spring calving season, I think it's important for producers to make a good record of any sets of twins that might have been born during this calving season. That's especially important if those twins were both a male and a female, both a heifer and a bull being born as twins together. And the reason is that any heifer calf that was born twin to a bull is very likely, over 95% chance, that she will be infertile, incapable of reproducing if we keep her around for a replacement heifer. So that's why we want to have that number written down in our book so that next fall when we wean those calves, we make sure to cull any heifers born twin to a bull so that we're not keeping them as replacements. And it's also a really important reminder to us as to why when we have a set of heifers that we're growing and putting through their first breeding season, that we make certain that we do a pregnancy checking on them as soon as is possible after the breeding season's over, so that we can identify any of those possible heifers that might have been born to a twin bull that we didn't catch, or even have a situation where during the pregnancy there was a bull calf that didn't make it, and that pregnancy, that portion of the pregnancy was lost, but the heifer still survived. That one could still turn out to be one of those infertile free martins, as we call them, that we don't want to have in our herd as a reproducing heifer. That then means that this calving season or any calving season, if you find a heifer calf that's born twin to a bull, Let's make sure that we make good records and do not keep that heifer calf as a replacement after weaning time. We look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, is here now. And Kim, the USDA released the April WASDE reports, and the big question is, how will it impact prices?
Well, I think it's going to have a pretty big impact on wheat prices. Let's look at corn and beans first, though. You look at the market, they were expecting the ending stocks for corn for the 17-18 marketing year to be 2,189,000,000 bushels. It came in at 2,182,000,000, I mean right at the estimate, so not much impact there. You look at soybeans, the market was expecting 574 million bushels there. It came in at 550, so slightly better, and we saw beans going up. I think the big news and the long run impact is going to be on wheat. On U.S. wheat, the market was expecting 1,036,000,000 bushels. It came in at 1,064. And anytime U.S. wheat ending stocks are over 1 billion bushels, that's bad news. And in this case is worse because the actual number was above the trade's expectations. And if you look at the world came in just slightly under 10 billion bushels in these stocks. The old record was slightly under 9.4 billion bushels. We got a lot of wheat around the world, and that's not good news. You're looking further out in long run, you look at the spread between hard red winter and soft red winter wheat. They used to be right even on the Chicago futures contracts. Right now, hard red has a 45-cent premium over soft red. You look at hard red winter versus hard red spring. You used to have about $1.50 premium of spring over winter. Right now, that's down to $1.
And that is for the 17-18 marketing year, correct?
That's correct. And you look out at 18-19 and what's happening in the United States, of course, with the hard red winter wheat. That's why we got the improved or the higher spread between hard and soft is weather problems with our hard red winter wheat crop.
Let's talk about the Russian and Ukraine 2018 wheat crops and kind of what's the picture there.
Well, that's more bad news for us. Why we're having problems with weather, why we're having weather problems producing a crop, it's going good in Ukraine and Russia. I read late this week that Ukrainian wheat production is expected to be higher than last year. That's not good news for Oklahoma wheat prices.
Now, China appeared to kind of back off the trade war talk this week. What does that mean for ag?
Well, we've been talking about that they're in the negotiation stage, and it's rhetoric right now. It's it's less than 60 days now, probably 50 days or so before any tariffs go into effect. But there's a lot of uncertainty out there with this trade business.
So with all of this in mind that you've talked about, the WASDE reports, the potential trade wars, what kind of advice do you have for Oklahoma producers this week?
Well, it's not a pretty picture, and I think the finances are going to be tight, and the financial situation is going to be tight, especially for wheat producers. I think now's the time to work with with the landowners on your rental agreements. Now's the time to tighten the belt, and now's the time to put a pencil and look at alternative products to produce.
Okay, Kim, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week. And to the classroom now to catch up with Brian Arnall and learn about the Stanford Equation to calculate nitrogen application.
I spend a lot of my time talking about nitrogen fertilizer, how do we apply it and when to apply. But I don't often get into the basics of where does that nitrogen rate come from. The interesting aspect of that is that nitrogen rate calculations can be taken back to a single equation called the Stanford Equation. Now there's 3 parameters of this equation. We're going to break those down one at a time. First, N-up. This is N uptake by the crop. So this is the nitrogen that's within the grain, the nitrogen within the forage, or the fiber. So it's that nitrogen that you're going to be removing from the field. It's not in a wheat crop, it doesn't count the nitrogen that goes back in the residue when you take the grain off. It's about the nitrogen that's relieved or removed with the grain. The second is in soil. So this is the nitrogen component within the soil. If you think back to the standard land grant recommendations, you have a yield goal recommendation. So what is your yield goal? In uptake minus soil test nitrogen. So that would be whatever's in the soil pre-plant. This also can include legume credits, maybe manure credits. So this is the N in the grain minus the nitrogen that could be in the soil. You take those two together and this is the total N that is needed, but then the third factor is in efficiency. This is the efficiency at which the fertilizer is going to be used by the crop. Now this takes into account source, method, timing, and losses. So if we really look at this, you go, what's the total needed by an efficiency? And that is divided by maybe a percentage. So in a case of needing 100 pounds of nitrogen for the crop at a 50% efficiency, we're going to need to apply 200 pounds because only 50% of what's applied will be taken up or used by the crop because the other is lost. Now we get back to this equation, we look at that yield goal recommendation. So if you look at it, winter wheat, the typical rule of thumb that we've been using for a long time is 2 pounds of N per bushel. Now that takes in all this, so yield goal nitrogen. So if I want 40 bushel of wheat, I need 80 pounds of nitrogen minus my soil test. Now that 80 is a little off because that 2 pounds of N, that's more than what the crop needs. Winter wheat is only using about or having about 1.26 to 1.3 pounds of N per bushel. So where does that 2 come from? That's the efficiency. That old rule of thumb is taking in all aspects of this and basically increasing the nitrogen needed per bushel to account for that efficiency. If you want to know more about nitrogen rate recommendations, go to the SUNUP webpage at www.sunup.okstate.edu.
Well, I know a lot of you are still dealing with dry conditions, but I'm praying that all of us will get some good spring rains to get the grass growing real well. Now, one of the problems that we see in sheep and goats when it starts to get wet and muddy is we start to see some foot problems. And the two most common problems we see are foot rot and foot scald. Now, foot scald is caused by a bacteria called Fusobacterium necrophorum, and that particular problem usually infects that area between the toes. You'll see it look red or maybe moist. It'll be inflamed, maybe a little swollen. Now, foot rot, on the other hand, which usually begins as foot scald, usually is a much worse condition than foot scald. There's another bacteria involved in it called Dictyobacter nodosus, which can really cause some destruction to the hoof. When we think about treating these conditions, one of the first things I would suggest to you is to isolate these guys, because in foot rot, that is a contagious disease, and the way that bacteria survives is it survives in the feet of carrier animals and is transferred from one animal to the next. So we need to get these guys isolated when we have a foot rot case. Next, we need to select the appropriate antibiotic to treat these with. I would suggest you to consult with your veterinarian on picking out what is the best product for you. We probably need to be pretty aggressive with these feet and trimming them. There's been some studies in Australia that says that doesn't necessarily affect the outcome, but I would still get in there and trim those feet up pretty heavily. If you've got several of these to treat, you may want to think about using a foot bath. Some of the products that we put in there like copper sulfate or formalin or zinc sulfate. It may make it a lot more convenient for you if you've got several to treat. The last thing you might want to do is give these guys some pain medication, so be sure and consult your veterinarian on what you might do about that. Prevention would begin with sanitation. Try to keep things as clean as possible. Nutrition plays a very important part. Zinc and biotin, vitamin A, vitamin E are very important in the health of the hoof. Once again, really important that you keep that foot dry. You may have to make some type of alloway where these guys walk through some lime to dry their feet off when it's really wet, or you just may have to make you a foot bath up and have them go through that every now and then to keep this problem under control. Hey, if you'd like some more information about foot problems in sheep and goats, if you'll go to sunup.okstate.edu.
to a milestone for Class 18 of the Oklahoma Agricultural Leadership Program. They've officially graduated from the 2-year program that involves seminars and tours around Oklahoma and even a week in our nation's capital. But the capstone is always the international trip, and this time they traveled to Nicaragua, Panama, and Costa Rica.
The international component is always a very important part of our program. It's the last seminar that we do, and it's usually around 2 weeks.
Well, we started out in Nicaragua, spent a couple days there, went to some Brahma ranches.
The country also grows tobacco for cigars, as well as rice, a staple food in that region. After Nicaragua, the group had the opportunity to see one of the 7 wonders of the modern world, the Panama Canal. The class also visited a little-known facility that is critical to local livestock producers.
Probably one of the most important visits that we saw was in Panama, going to the screwworm facility. That is a facility where they rear sterile male screwworm flies that they release 14 million flies every week.
Screwworms lay their eggs in the open wounds of livestock, causing severe infections and even death. Sterilized male flies mate with the females but don't reproduce. This saves the U.S. livestock industry more than $1 billion annually.
Then we ended up in Costa Rica, where we got to see the pineapples, bananas, coffee. Then finally made her back to the United States. I really enjoyed the pineapples and just getting to see, you know, that whole operation, how they was harvested, and then, you know, as we watched them come in and being packaged, we got to try it, and pineapple was amazing.
And so just to have them exposed to those kinds of farms and plantations and ranches gives them a good overall perspective of how important agriculture is across the world, because we rely on going to the grocery store here and being able to have bananas year-round. Well, you can't do that if the marketing system doesn't exist somewhere else in the world.
Getting to see how they do stuff over there, which is a lot different than what we do stuff in the United States. Everything over there, a lot of it is hand labor.
What we want these participants to gain on their international trip is we want them to gain perspective. When you come back to Oklahoma, bring back what you're seeing, what's good, what's bad.
This class marks a milestone for the program, with more than 500 graduates of the Oklahoma Agricultural Leadership Program since it began in 1983.
This program's great. I encourage all my producers that I work with on a daily basis to do this, and I know family's a big commitment. I know there's time, but it's worth it. If you can spare the time and you know, allow yourself to do this, it's going to pay dividends in your future.
Mainly the camaraderie of everybody in the class. You know, getting to know everybody, getting to meet the contacts and stuff out on those individual basis, and getting to know people. I mean, learned a lot and got to meet a lot of really cool, interesting people along the way.
And special congratulations to our friend and colleague Craig Woods, who is a graduate of Class 18 and shot and produced that story. And if you're interested in applying to OALP's Class 19, we have a link on our website, sunup.okstate.edu. The application deadline is May 10th. And that'll do it for us this week. We leave you today with a visit to OSU's Formal Gardens, where Steve Dobbs and his team are helping campus stay green both above and below the soil.
Well, most people believe that what we have planted on campus through the wintertime is wheat, but it's actually maybe a close cousin. It's actually cereal rye grain. It'd be hard to tell them apart, especially at the stage that we keep them growing, which is trimmed like a turf grass almost for the winter months. We plant the rye for several reasons, one of which is for color. Through the winter time, green is actually a pretty color through the winter when everything else seems to be brown or tan or dormant. The other reason where you see it planted is because it works as a cover crop or a green manure crop. So here in the formal garden where you see it most predominantly, we plant it in the fall and we grow it through the winter time. We till it into the ground, roots and all the top that's left, and it acts again like a green manure crop. So we're adding organic matter back to the soil, which actually benefits the soil. It helps encourage more microorganisms. It's a fluffier, lighter soil, so we grow seasonal color a little bit better. With organic matter, we get more earthworms, which we didn't used to have in this garden. It was very heavy clay, so it's really worked nicely as a green manure crop. Rye grain, when grown as a green manure crop, can actually minimize soil-borne diseases. And some studies even show it might minimize soil-borne nematodes. And so we've had some of those problems in the formal garden, and so we also are growing it for that reason. So that's actually putting design and color with some research-based science, and I think we're seeing some results of that. Now we haven't done a scientific study with it, but we are definitely seeing some benefits in using the rye grain.